My name is Joe Class. I work in the Threat Preparedness Program at the Monongalia County Health Department, and I'm also a nationally registered paramedic. Knowing how to stop bleeding is very important because while many times when we bleed it'll stop on its own or with minimal interventions, sometimes we'll have a wound or an injury that will have massive bleeding, and it's possible to bleed to death in under 3 minutes. So it is very important to know how to stop life-threatening bleeding. This is a combat application tourniquet, or CAT tourniquet. Tourniquets are used to control bleeding on an extremity. So tourniquets actually work by compressing the artery against the bone in an arm or a leg to actually compress that artery and stop the bleeding. Putting a tourniquet on, first thing you're going to do is you want to loop it around the extremity, and you'll notice that the CAT tourniquets have a little red tab right here. Ideally, you want that pointed towards the center line of the body because that'll make it a little bit easier to tighten down. But if you forget and put it on this way, that's not a big deal. So we're going to loop it around the extremity, making sure that it's at least 2 to 3 inches above the wound. Then we're going to pull and try to cinch this as tight as we can get it, because the tighter we make it here, the easier it's going to be to actually tighten down the tourniquet with the windlass rod. So after we tighten it here, we're going to Velcro it back onto itself, and then we're going to pull up and twist the windlass rod, and we're going to keep twisting until the bleeding stops or until we cannot twist it anymore. Once the bleeding has stopped, you're then going to take this windlass rod and you're going to actually secure it right here in the windlass rod holder. Then you're going to pull this running end and pull that through. And what this is going to do is this is going to secure the windlass rod to make sure the tourniquet doesn't get loose again. You're then going to pull this little tab right here, which will also help secure the windlass rod, and it has a location for you to write the time down of when you apply the tourniquet. You may not always have a commercial tourniquet with you, so it's important to know how to make an improvised tourniquet to try to stop life-threatening extremity hemorrhage. So the first thing you're going to need is some type of fabric, whether it be ripped t-shirt or, in this case, triangle bandage. So similar to a commercial tourniquet, you're going to want it to be at least 2 to 3 inches above the wound, and you're also going to want to make sure that it is at least 2 inches wide, because if it's really thin, all it's going to do is it's going to dig into the skin, and it's not going to work very well as far as compressing the artery and stopping the bleeding. So you want to make sure it's at least 2 inches wide, and you're going to put it above the wound, and then you're simply going to tie an overhand knot or a granny knot. And then you're going to need something to be your windlass rod. In this case, I just have a pair of scissors, but it could be a stick, it could be a pocket knife, just anything that's actually going to allow you to cinch it down. You're then going to take your improvised windlass rod and you're going to put it above that knot, and you're going to tie another knot, overhand knot. So you're going to tighten this down, and then just like a CAT tourniquet, you're going to start twisting, pull up and twist the windlass rod. And you're going to keep doing that until the bleeding stops. Once the bleeding stops, you're then going to have to secure that windlass rod so it doesn't untighten. So to do that, you're just going to take the rest of your fabric and you're going to loop that around the windlass, and then you're going to tie another knot. The most common and most effective way to stop bleeding is with direct pressure, and this works both for minor wounds and also for major wounds that have extensive bleeding. So when applying direct pressure, there are a couple different ways you can do that as far as what you use. You can use a t-shirt, a gloved hand, or a bandage. So if you're using a bandage, there are a couple of different types of bandages out there. And when we're talking about bleeding control, really the thing you're going to want to look at is whether it has a hemostatic agent in it or not. So a hemostatic agent is basically a chemical that is going to speed up the clotting process. So obviously the advantage of that is that it'll stop the bleeding faster. Regardless of whether you have a bandage with that chemical or not though, the technique is going to be the same. You're going to locate the wound. You're then going to take whatever you have, so we'll say that the wound is on the shoulder, and we're going to apply hard direct pressure to that wound. And we're going to push, and we're going to maintain that pressure for at least 10 minutes. So if you are using a hemostatic agent, you can actually hold it. They say it takes about 3 minutes for clotting to happen. However, my recommendation would be that you continue to hold direct pressure, hold hard direct pressure until you are relieved by a first responder. The primary reason that we pack a wound is that when applying direct pressure, if there's a really large wound, it can sometimes be difficult to actually apply that pressure to the bleeding vein or artery. So when we pack a wound, we're actually taking a bandage or a t-shirt or whatever it may be, and we're packing that into the wound and then applying direct pressure over it. And what that's going to do is that's going to push that material down on the bleeding vein or artery to stop the bleeding. In this scenario, we're going to use a bandage. However, you can pack a wound with any material. Ideally, you want the material to be clean. However, our primary purpose is to stop the bleeding. So that is our main concern. So you're going to take whatever you have, and you are actually going to pack it directly into the wound. And you're going to keep going until you cannot get any more of your bandage or material into that wound. And some wounds may require more than one bandage. So you're going to keep going until it's fully packed, and then you're going to take your hand and you're going to apply direct pressure over that packed wound. And you're going to hold that direct pressure for at least 10 minutes. If you're using a hemostatic gauze that has a chemical that speeds up clotting, the recommendation is to hold for 3 minutes. But like I mentioned before, you really just want to hold direct pressure until you're relieved by first responders. One of the great things about Stop the Bleed training is that it's easy and it works, and you absolutely can save a life. If you're interested in an in-person Stop the Bleed class, or you'd like to find out additional information about Stop the Bleed, you can go to our website or reach out to us on social media.